Hi, I'm Dr. Callie Seymour. Welcome to Chiropractic Philosophy for CAs. Dr. Owen used to say, I can take a great doctor and a mediocre staff, and I will have a mediocre practice. And I can take a mediocre doctor and a great staff, and I will have a great practice. And that could not be any more true today than it was the day he said it. You matter greatly in your practice. And I want to help you today to really discover the truth of chiropractic so that you can understand how important you are in the position that God has chosen for you. So it starts really with having a servant heart. So what is a servant's heart? A servant's heart has everything to do with your perspective of not only the job that you do, but the people that you serve. To illustrate this, I want to tell you about a gentleman who woke up really late. Let's call him Bob. Woke up really late one day for work, and his car wouldn't start, so he has to take a bus. So he gets on the bus, and he's already in this frustrated mind state because of how the morning is beginning. And then the second stop after he gets on, another gentleman gets on, and this gentleman has 4 kids. So this guy gets on the bus and he sits down and he just looks straight ahead and he lets his 4 kids just run around the bus and doesn't even correct him or doesn't even care about what they're doing, apparently. So Bob, person A, starts to get incredibly frustrated by this. And he keeps telling himself the story about what's going on. You know, things like, this is what's wrong in America today. People are not taking care of their kids, they're not disciplining their kids, and on and on and on. And if this continues, I'm going to get up and give this guy a piece of my mind. So finally, that's just what he does. He gets up and in a frustrated mind state, he walks to the front of the bus and he taps the gentleman, the father of these kids. And this guy turns around and he's just weeping. So the first gentleman, Bob, is taken back, but he still continues on with what he intended to do, which is tell this guy off. And hey, your kids are running around the bus and you're not even disciplining them, or you need to control your kids. We're trying to get to work and it's already been a stressful day. Well, this guy starts apologizing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're right. It's just, I just lost my wife. I just came from the hospital and, I just lost my wife. I don't know what to do. My kids just lost their mom. They don't know what to do. And I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right. So this guy, Bob, now he feels like about this big. And all of a sudden, though, everything changes for him. His perspective about this situation completely changes. So nothing changes, but everything changes. Behavior's still the same, but his perspective is different. That's the servant heart perspective. And what that means is you're looking to the best interests of the patients. And all your protocols that you learn filter through that servant heart so that you can do the difficult things sometimes that needs to be done in order to best serve the patient. You're always thinking about them. Whether it comes to collecting money at the front desk or holding them accountable to their appointments, it's best for them, then you're going to do it. The other thing it helps you with is when you really operate from a position of having a servant heart, you can deal with those difficult patients, the people that are coming in who've been in chronic pain, who are taking it out on everyone around them. It's real easy to be harsh and to be judgmental towards those patients. But when you have a servant's heart, you're going to look at it differently. You're going to be able to operate from a position of empathy for these patients. And that's really what having a servant's heart is all about. That's what it means to be a super CA. So with that, let's jump into some philosophy. First of all, let's start with the history of chiropractic. Chiropractic began in Davenport, Iowa in 1895 with a gentleman named D.D. Palmer. Eventually Dr. D.D. Palmer. But at first, D.D. Palmer, he was an amazing man. He was an entrepreneur. He had a great love for learning. And he was always operating from this question of why. Why do two kids that grow up in the same family, in the same environment, have completely different immune countenances? Why does one get sick and the other doesn't when they've been exposed to the same things? So this question burned in his heart, and he continued to research and study to try to find answers to that very question. So he was a farmer. He grew his own line of organic raspberries called the homegrown raspberries. He had a grocery store where he sold his produce. He also did something called magnetic therapy. Now, magnetic therapy really had nothing to do with magnets. It was basically a combination of traditional Chinese acupuncture meridian points and massage therapy. So basically what he would do is he would find certain points of irritation, and he would alleviate those points by putting pressure on them. So what was happening though is he was getting success with cases that the MDs in the community were not successful with treating by drugs and surgery. So he became kind of an outcast and almost a competitor to them. So they didn't they didn't promote necessarily his treatments. But he was getting so much success with his patient care that he ended up opening an infirmary where he treated people. Now, he was a self-studied anatomist. He had studied the body for years and years and years, which is how he developed this magnetic therapy in the first place, by understanding the nerve pathways and the muscles, ligaments, tendons, the bones. So through his continued study, he began to develop a theory that if there was interference on a nerve root, and that interference was created by a bone or a series of bones putting pressure on that nerve root, then there would be a minimized health. There would be disease. And one day he got the opportunity to test his theory when a janitor in his own infirmary named Harvey Lillard, who had suffered from hearing loss, he was deaf, he asked if Harvey would be okay with him touching his spine, and if he found a point where he felt like there was nerve interference, if he could correct that. So Harvey Lillard, having known him for a while and trusting his theories, said, yeah, sure. So D.D. Palmer did just that. He found areas of nerve interference, he moved the bone and freed up that nerve root, and Harvey Lillard got his hearing back. So that was the very first chiropractic adjustment. And from there, the entire profession developed. D.D. Palmer went on to develop Palmer College of Chiropractic, or Palmer School of Chiropractic in Davenport, Iowa. His son, B.J. Palmer, became the first upper cervical specific chiropractor. And fun fact, B.J. Palmer's wife, also Mabel Palmer, she also became the first female chiropractor. So a lot of rich history there. And that's how it all started. So by definition, chiropractic means, chiro means hand and practique means effective practice. So how does chiropractic work? Well, before we get into that, I want to just kind of throw something out there. Even though by definition it is the removal of, the hand, it's, effective practice of the hand. We do have instrument adjusting as well nowadays. Of course, your hand is still controlling the instrument. But instrument adjusting, many of you may be in practices that do instrument adjusting, the activator, atlas orthogonal, orthospinalogy. There are so many different techniques. And all of them work. The research substantiates any valid technique that's out there. But the difference is the doctor just has to master that technique. So what controls the body? The brain. The brain controls all the functions of the body. It is your primary, most important organ. And interestingly enough, the way God made the body, the brain sits in its own encased helmet called the skull. So the bones of the skull protect the brain from injury, and there's very little room for swelling, or very little room for error there. That's why concussions can be so problematic so fast. When someone hits their head, their brain can swell, and there's not enough room in the head for the brain to be able to increase in size at all without creating a lot of problems. So the brain is the most protected because it is the most important. It sends signals, so the brain has the ability to send signals through the spinal cord down to every organ and every system that you have. None of those organs or none of those systems will work unless they send and receive signals to and from the brain. Okay, so the brain initiates the signals to the heart, to the lungs, to the stomach, to the muscles. And if you lose that connectivity, then you lose life. So innate intelligence is just a fancy way of saying the body's inborn ability to heal. It was already put there. So your body is a self-healing mechanism. It was made to work, it was made to function, and it will do that as long as there's nothing interfering with that process. So if you think about the areas of your body that you don't need to think through to coordinate. So right now you're sitting here, you're breathing without thinking about it. Your heart is beating without thinking about it. You're able to connect a thought and communicate a word without thinking about it. And it just happens lightning fast. Those are all ways that the body is already being controlled by the brain. The other thing is when you think of the healing process, think about if you cut your finger or if you have an injury, like let's just go with the example of a minor injury. So you cut your finger, you have a shaving cut on your leg, whatever it is. Well, you don't have to think about it healing. You don't have to stop everything and then sit there and focus on that and command it all night to heal. You can simply just put a Band-Aid on it and go about your day. And the next day, the skin already looks different. A few days later, you may have brand new skin there and not even remember what happened. That's the healing mechanism of the body in a very simple manner explained. But that same principle holds true even for serious injuries and even for serious disease. The body was made to be self-healing. It knows how to create homeostasis. It knows how to self-regulate. When someone is not healthy, usually what is happening is there's just something interfering with their own ability to self-regulate and to do that. And so part of what chiropractic does is we find areas of interference in the nervous system and we remove that interference by moving the bone off the nerves, okay, by whatever technique your doctor utilizes. And then you back off and you let the natural inborn ability to self-heal manifest. There are many things that cause subluxation that we'll get to in a moment. Let's first talk about the nervous system. The way that it's broken down, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is the pathway, it's almost like the highway that connects the brain to the rest of the body. So you've got this long highway, and that highway is encased in the spinal cord. I'm sorry, the vertebral column. So the spinal cord goes down through the center of all the spinal bones. So what we're looking for is areas in the spinal bones that are impinging on the nervous system or on either the spinal cord or what's called the peripheral nerves. So the brain and spinal cord then branches out by little nerve pathways called the peripheral nerves, and those nerve pathways all go somewhere. So every organ, every muscle, every system that you have is regulated and controlled by the brain and the spinal cord. Your digestive system, your cardiovascular system, your endocrine system, your nervous system, all of those, your immune system, all of those systems are just fancy minor pathways that are controlled by the brain and the spinal cord, the central nervous system. So within that peripheral nervous system, you have nerve pathways that speed up and you have nerve pathways that slow down. And those are constantly regulating one another. So you have motor and sensory, and you also have the autonomic portions of the nervous system, which happen without you thinking about them. So let's give some examples because I know it can be kind of confusing. So let's think of your legs, your quad muscles. When you walk, you have the motor component of walking that's created, or that's that's controlled by the nervous system, which is the motor is the muscle. So that's the muscle's ability to contract and relax as you perform the movement. You have the sensory component, which is allowing your body to feel where it is in space, like feel your foot on the floor, feel the contraction of the muscle so that you can perform that movement. And then you've got the autonomic part, which is the part that causes you to go from thinking you want to walk to just performing the movement without necessarily being aware that that even happened because it's so lightning fast. So you've also, within this nervous system, you've got that speed up and that slow down. The speed up portion of the nervous system is called the sympathetic nervous system. That's also called fight or flight. So you may have heard of that. That speeds everything up so that you can either fight or flee in a situation. The parasympathetic is called the wine and dine sometimes. And what that means is that slows everything down. It prepares your body to rest, to sleep, to regulate after a situation of fight or flight. So let's give an example of that. Let's say that wherever you're sitting right now, that someone comes tearing through the door with a mask and a gun. Well, automatically, okay, because this is part of the autonomic part, the autonomy part of your body will kick into gear without you having to think about it. That input, that sensory input of seeing someone come tearing through the door will cause the sympathetic part of your nervous system to fire. So all of a sudden, you will be ready. You'll have this surge of energy. Your saliva will dry up. Your eyes will dilate because you'll be ready to deal with this situation. Your chemical reaction will be you'll have cortisol and adrenaline rushed into your system and epinephrine, all the things that cause you to be able to speed up and fight this situation or flee from it. Then let's say that we found out that this was just a joke, like whoever it is takes their mask off and you realize it's just your buddy playing a joke on you. Well, all of a sudden then you'll calm down, but you'll still have this heightened sense of awareness for about an hour. That's how amazing this process is. The parasympathetic nervous system is what will kick in to bring that down. Okay, so parasympathetics will come and override that fight or flight syndrome and cause you to begin to relax again. Parasympathetic is also what should kick in when it's time to go to sleep. So right before bedtime, you may start to get sleepy, you'll yawn, your eyes will constrict and not let in so much light. There's things that will happen mechanistically to help your body to come into this calmed state. And that's the parasympathetics. So when things are working well, when your body's in homeostasis, you're constantly self-regulating. You're up when you're supposed to be up, and then you're able to come down when you're supposed to come down. Both of those are happening. What we see oftentimes is that someone's nervous system is maladapting to their environment. So their sympathetic system may be constantly up, or their parasympathetic system may be constantly the one overriding everything. So this would look like your patients that come in that may kind of live on caffeine and they have insomnia and they're just not sleeping. They're constantly anxious. So they may have a sympathetic issue where a sympathetic system is constantly up and they're never able to calm down and relax. And then you may have the opposite side where people come in and they're completely fatigued all the time. And that would be that parasympathetic dominance. The interesting thing, and this is really, really important for you as a CA to understand, because the more that you can grasp this concept, the more that you can help your patients to not be so symptom focused. You can have the same exact person that comes in with a subluxation, let's say right here. And the word subluxation we'll get to in a minute, but basically it's a bone that's misaligned that's putting pressure on the nervous system. So if you have a misalignment up in here, it can be the exact same misalignment, but in one person, it can manifest as a sympathetic issue. So they can be constantly anxious and insomniac. Then you can have a second person who's got the exact same misalignment in their spine, but in their situation, they're constantly fatigued and dealing with low thyroid issues. Same exact area of the spine, but it can show up symptomatically completely different depending on which portion of the nervous system is being affected for this person. The reason that this is critical to understand is because it helps you not to be so focused on symptoms. Right now, the allopathic model that this culture operates from is a symptom management model. Here's a symptom, here's a drug to fix the symptom. The problem with that, and I hope you're starting to see this, the problem with that is that if you just chase symptoms, you may never get down to the root cause. Because in the allopathic model, let's say those two people that we just went over the example of, they would go to a doctor and one would be given an anti-anxiety medication and the other might be given something to speed them up. Neither one of those things would address the cause of the problem. So how does chiropractic really work? Chiropractic works by reducing interferences in the nervous system so that the nervous system can do the healing that it was made to do in the first place. Chiropractors find areas of what's called subluxations, and they remove them with a chiropractic adjustment. So let's say that someone comes in and they have, the anxiety and the problems up here. Once we take x-rays and we do our proper examinations, we may find that this bone here is misaligned and it's putting pressure on the brainstem area, creating the symptoms that the patient's having. So it's not that we don't care about the symptoms, we do, but we care about the cause because we know if we can remove that cause, that the patient will manifest health on their own. So our job is, once we find that this is misaligned, we will adjust it with a specific chiropractic adjustment that puts the bone back in the correct position, and then we will back off and let the body heal. It's the body always that's going to do its own healing. It's no doctor that's going to do that. Just like no drug or surgery is going to do that. It's still the body that has to correct and adapt and manage that. So our job is to find subluxations, remove them, and let the body heal. The way that you find those subluxations is different for different doctors depending on their technique. We may find it on the x-ray, we may find it by touching, and then there's 5 different things that we look for, which we'll go over in just a moment. So the definition of a subluxation is a misalignment of a spinal segment that's causing irritation to a nerve, resulting in a loss of normal function. So sub means less than, and luxation is dislocation. So again, it's a bone that's misaligned that's putting pressure on a nerve. Even a minor misalignment can put tremendous amounts of pressure on the nerve and create a loss of health. So the 5 things that we look for when we're determining if an area is truly subluxated or not is tenderness. So that may be tenderness that the patient doesn't even know about until we touch a certain spot and then they're, ow, wow, that did hurt. I didn't realize it hurt. Or they may already be aware. They may come in saying, hey, it hurts here. So tenderness is one indicator. Swelling is another indicator. Again, that can be grossly obvious swelling, or it can be not so obvious swelling. You can come in with someone with a very swollen trap muscle that's lifting their shoulder. That would be a situation of obvious swelling. It may be red and hot, or it may be an area that's just got some inflammation around the capsule that we feel when we're touching the spine like we're trained to do. You're also looking for the 3rd thing, which is muscle spasm. Now, a muscle will only spasm around an area that it's trying to protect. When it comes to a spinal muscle, and you can have a tight quad or bicep, but when it comes to a spinal muscle, you should never have muscle spasms. Those are not a normal thing to have. So if they're there, it indicates to us that that muscle is tightening over a bone underneath it that it's trying to protect and stabilize. So a muscle spasm would be an indicator of a subluxation. The 4th thing we look for is a temperature difference. So with respect to the bone above it or below it, there would be a significant temperature difference. Sometimes we use equipment called a nervoscope or a thermoscope. Some doctors use those. Other doctors just use their hands to palpate, feel up and down the spine, and they would feel areas of temperature change. And they can be an area that's too hot or an area that's too cold, depending on the loss of nerve function. The fifth thing we look for is restricted motion. So we may do things like range of motion studies. We've got a lot of different equipment that we can utilize for that. And that would be when we have the patient, say, turn left and right, and they can turn a lot further one way than they can the other. That would be a restricted range of motion. And again, sometimes the patient already knows that they can't perform certain movements, and they can communicate that to us already, which is a good indicator. But sometimes they're not aware of those losses of motion until we run them through the proper examinations. So as a recap, those 5 things are tenderness, swelling, muscle spasm, temperature difference, and restricted motion. So what causes a subluxation? This is where it gets super interesting. There are a lot of things that can cause subluxation. And some of the newer research that's been really, really cool, it identifies areas that can cause subluxation that we maybe weren't aware of before. 100 years ago, when chiropractic first started, a lot of the technology wasn't available yet to let us actually measure neurological deviations just based on MRI studies. So the major causes of subluxation are physical, chemical, and emotional. So when it comes to physical causes of spinal misalignments, those are going to be your injuries or your accidents, your traumatic things. There's even a study that on birth trauma where they hooked OBGYNs up to force transducers. And basically, they identified that the average pull on the baby's neck was way more than what they anticipated. And so, subluxations can start as early as childbirth, and even in non-problematic labors, you can have so much pressure just on the baby's head just from the natural, normal birth process. And especially, when you have situations where the mom was basically paralyzed from the waist down, by having either a local or by having a nerve block. Sometimes she can't even feel how hard she's trying to push and the baby's not progressing. That can create a lot of stress as well. So even a normal birth, it doesn't have to be a problematic birth, just the process of birth is very traumatic, as some of you already know. So injuries and falls and accidents, those are all very common throughout childhood. You can have car accidents, you can have, again, just slips on ice, normal kind of falls and injuries almost always create subluxation in the spine. It'd be very difficult to have some of those and not have a consequence somewhere in the spine. By the time many of your patients get to your doctor and to your office, they have had multiple causes. So there may have been childbirth, and then there may have been, they may have carried a book bag that was way too heavy throughout the elementary school years, and then maybe had a car accident as a teenager and slipped and fell as an adult. And so by the time they get to you, there's usually a complication of factors and there's multiple causes. The next thing would be the chemical category. And the chemical category, this is very interesting because a lot of the newer research shows that processed food, alcohol, prescription drugs, recreational drugs, of course, smoking, environmental toxins, all of those things create such a toxic load on the body that chemical stressor can literally misalign your spine. It can create so much pressure on the nervous system and on the brainstem that it'll actually result in a subluxation. Very, very interesting stuff. And that's why it matters that what you eat and what you put in your body, because your body was only made to handle so much chemical load. And if we overdo that load, if we give it way more than what it can tolerate, there is going to be a consequence. And that consequence will show up as subluxation. I remember when we used to use the Nervoscope a lot, we'd have patients that would come in, and if they had had more than 1 cup of coffee, the needle would just go crazy. It would go, like way increased, and they were blown away by that. Like, what? I didn't have injury or anything. And I said, well, I would say, well, did you drink a lot of coffee this morning? Yes, I did. I drank a lot of coffee, and I took my prescription medications or whatever it was. And it would create so much interference in the nervous system that there would be pressure and inflammation on the nerve roots that was evidenced when we would scan for it. Emotional. This is another extremely important category of subluxation. So your emotional health is so very important to your physical health. Most people know that by now, but there are a lot of good research studies that show, the chemicals that your body is flooded with when you're under emotional stress or struggle or pain are so problematic to the nervous system that they will create disease. And oftentimes the onset of that is a subluxation somewhere in the spine that was created due to an emotional overload. Very, very important things to understand. Ultimately, big picture wise, chiropractic is about the brain. It's about brain health. The brain's ability to send and receive messages is directly impacted by physical, chemical, and emotional stress. So if the brain's not healthy and it can't send healthy signals, you will have disease. If the brain is healthy and it's trying to send signals, but those signals don't get through because of subluxations in the spine, then you will lose your health. It will either be marginalized or completely lost, but it will be affected and hindered by interference from those three categories. And then again, just to reiterate, most of your patients are going to have the cumulative effects of multiple factors. They may have physical, emotional, and chemical stressors in their life over time that have created a host of subluxation patterns. So chiropractors treat the cause, not the symptom. Again, back to that example of you can have two people come in with the exact same subluxation, but in one person it's creating a sympathetic issue and in the other it's creating a parasympathetic issue. And that's why it's really important that we not just chase symptoms, because it's very easy to miss the cause if you're doing that. Let's kind of talk about if someone's condition is being treated by symptom management only, not only can the cause be missed, but it can actually make things worse. For example, headaches are not an ibuprofen deficiency. So if we try to fix a headache consistently with giving someone ibuprofen, then number one, we're not getting down to the root cause of why the headache's there to begin with. Number two, we can be creating stomach damage because of the ibuprofen. And not to mention what it does to the blood. It really makes the blood weird. Number three, a problem can actually get worse over time because it was being masked, not addressed. Okay, now that does not mean necessarily that we're anti-medication. It just means we're pro-chiropractic. Medication is for crisis management. How can the CA help? So your job is so complex, and we get that. You wear a number of different hats in the office. But what we really want you to understand more than anything is this big picture of chiropractic. Because without that, if that's not in your head and heart, it's going to be very difficult for you to do all the other pieces of your job, because the why behind them may be missed. So if you can really get this big picture of chiropractic and you can transfer that to your patients, everything else about the protocols and procedures will fall into place, because you'll be learning those things through this lens of understanding the big picture of chiropractic. This is about the brain. This is about helping people with drug-free, surgery-free options whenever possible. So one of the best ways for you to grasp that is to make sure that you're under care yourself. Okay, make sure that you are being treated, because it's through your experience you will learn a lot about the patient's perspective as well. But of course, for your own health, we want you as healthy as possible. So we want you to enjoy the benefits of a chiropractic lifestyle. Let's go over some pre and post x-rays. Your doctors are going to have plenty, I'm sure, in your office. So get in there and talk to them about some of the cases so that they can kind of really help you understand how lives are tremendously changed. You'll hear situations where people were on 14, 15 medications, they begin chiropractic care, and within 6 months, they're able to cut those in half simply because their body is functioning better. I mean, this is phenomenal stuff. So let's talk about the lives we need to change. anybody that comes in who is new to chiropractic, usually they'll have this retraining process because everything they've learned from an allopathic standpoint, now they may be coming into question. So we have to be really, really patient with that process and understand that unless someone grew up with chiropractic, a lot of these concepts may be new. So the lives we need to change. I'm going to give you one story, one example. I had a patient come in. So she was a young girl, and by the time she came into me, she'd already had 2 full spine Harrington rods put in her body. And those rods, basically, those are metal rods that go up and down the spine in order to stabilize a scoliosis, which there are several types of scoliosis, but the type she had, it was an S-curve scoliosis measuring about 40-something degrees. And when she went as a young child, she was probably 9 or 10. She went to the pediatrician and they told her parents, listen, if you don't do this surgery and you don't do it soon, your child's going to be in a wheelchair. Well, these parents, this is a glorious family. They're wonderful. They do their own research, but they had never heard of chiropractic care. And that choice or that option was not even offered to them. And so unfortunately, because they didn't know any better, that's what they did. They did that next step and they did the surgery. Well, shortly after she had that surgery, her body started to go into just neurological chaos. She started to have virus infection after virus infection. She started to have weird manifestations, skin breaking out all the time, tremendous anxiety. She couldn't sleep. She lost all kinds of weight. She had all kinds of GI upset. And by that time, her menstrual cycle had started and she was having all kinds of problems with that, constant pain, just a really, really difficult situation. By the time she gets to me, she's a teenager and she's already on 14 medications and she's basically bedridden. Like her parents had to carry her in each and every time. And this was back when I first opened up. So this is like 1999. So I'm new and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to even adjust? She's got full rods all the way up and down her spine. So the only 2 areas I could even adjust were the upper cervical area and the sacral area, which is kind of the bottom part where your lumbar spine meets the pelvis. So that's all I did was adjust those 2 areas. Well, within 6 months, she was able to drop off of 5 or 6 of her medications. And she started to have some good days. It took a long time, but she understood, at this point, they couldn't even take the rods out because her muscles had grown around the rods and literally attached to them. So this was a devastating, life-changing situation. This girl thought she would never be able to be the same. So fast forward, so she's in her 30s now, she's married, she's off of all medications. Yeah, of course she still has the rods, but she's had 2 children when she thought she would never be able to have kids. And she, at this point, even started her own line of all-natural healthcare products, creams and face things. And I mean, it's just an amazing story. So there is almost no one that we can't help. That does not mean we can fix everything because, of course, we don't do it anyway. It's the person's body. But we've got to begin to have more faith in the body's healing ability than we have in all these drugs and things that we put in our body. We can't expect those to make the difference. We've really got to start to understand and grab hold of the beautiful concept of the body is self-healing. And when we remove interference, there's almost nothing that can't begin to move in a better direction. So ask your doctors. I'm sure they're going to have plenty of stories about the lives that we change and how that happens. So a whiplash example here. Before care, so a whiplash is usually from some sort of motor vehicle accident or some sort of traumatic fall where the head either goes forward and back or it goes back and forward. You can also have a side-to-side whiplash type injury. But basically the body loses its normal biomechanics and you lose the curve, the natural normal curve that's supposed to be in the neck. So even 4 weeks later after care, you can begin to see a great normal progress in the curve, which takes a tremendous amount of pressure off the spinal cord. So the sooner the better. The sooner that people get in and start care after any sort of accident or injury, the better off they'll be in terms of long-term progress. For some of the upper cervical films, you can see immediate change in the neck curve just by correcting the subluxation that's in the top bone, that atlas. Just by doing that, after one adjustment, sometimes you can begin to see normal curve restored as well. It's amazing. So let's kind of talk about the difference in healthcare models. What we're talking about with chiropractic and the position that we operate from is a vitalistic mindset. A vitalistic system focuses on the body's ability to self-heal. So with that focus being in mind, we become a radar for looking at anything that's interfering in the body's ability to self-heal like it was supposed to be. So we're looking at things like diet, we're looking at toxicity, we're looking at emotional stress, we're looking, of course, at subluxation as being our primary factor. No matter what you're eating or how positive a person you are, if your nervous system is being affected because of a subluxation, you cannot express full and complete health. So we always start there. Where are the subluxations? How can we remove them? And then what can we add adjunctively to support the body's healing processes? That's where things like the well-aligned system and just the nutrition and the fitness, all of those things really matter. So the more that you can incorporate those things for your patients, the more that your doctor does that and the more that you can support that, the better off the patient's going to be, and the more positive that healing process is going to happen. So back to the U.S. healthcare system. Right now, we operate under what's called an allopathic model. And allopathy is symptom-focused. It's symptom management. So the purpose of an allopathic healthcare model is to find a symptom and remove the symptom. And the removal of that symptom is usually done by drugs and surgery. Again, a vitalistic model focuses on the body's inborn ability to self-heal and focuses on removing anything that might be interfering with that process. So the allopathic healthcare system works for crisis care, but it doesn't work for wellness care. And here's why. So that we have currently the most extensive healthcare system in the world. We have the most doctors, the best medical schools, the best training, the best technology. And because of that, thankfully, America is number one when it comes to emergency and crisis care. Traumatic care is when you do want to focus on symptoms first. Okay, let's say that you won't, but let's say that unfortunately that you did. If you got in a bad car accident today or if you had a stroke, then you would need immediate crisis care to stop the progress of whatever's happening that could take your life right now. Okay, so let's say that you're bleeding out. Well, you've got to have your blood clot right now in order to save your life. That's crisis care. And that's when drugs and surgery are necessary and appropriate. Okay, but unfortunately, what's happening is even though we're number one in crisis care, less than 1% of reasons that people visit the doctor or the ER is true crisis care. Less than 1%. The other 99% of reasons that people go in for medical care are not truly crisis, but they're being handled by that same crisis model. And hopefully you see the problem with that. It's not fixing anything. In fact, most of our problems are getting worse. The more drugs and surgery that we throw at things, the worse the problems are getting. So you can look across the board at hypertension, at high cholesterol, all those things that drugs are being utilized as the primary intervention source. Those things are getting worse, not better. So what we're doing is not working. So we propose that, what if we were to look at healthcare from a vitalistic standpoint and only use crisis care or allopathic mindset when it's necessary, which is true crisis care. But before we can really do that as a culture, we've got to understand it ourselves. We as doctors and you as CAs, we as a team have tremendous ability to impact our communities with this philosophy, but we've got to grasp it first, and we've got to operate that way, and we've got to see it work, which it is working. It's working all the time in your offices. So let's do some comparative values. How much does your office charge? So think through like what your office standard visit fee is. Say it's one adjustment and one therapy, or if it's just one adjustment, or if it's one adjustment and two therapies or some supplementation. So basically anywhere from $40 to $100 is going to be average for most of us. Well, how much do braces cost? About $4,000 on average to get that true correction. How much is neck surgery? How much is back surgery? So your average neck surgery is about $130,000. Average back surgery is $150,000. And these are non-complicated types. What I really encourage you to do is research, and this is Googleable facts, right? So just research in your area what the average cost is for the conditions that you see, that you treat. So sinus surgeries, ear infections, so tubes in the ears, and just Google these things, and you'll see for yourself that the patient's actually getting a much more cost-effective means of treatment when they come to your office. Not only that, they're having the cause addressed rather than just the symptoms. So the next slide here, the table of iatrogenic deaths. This is so puzzling to me and so tragic. If you look at the reality of what's really going on, and again, this is updated all the time. So this is another one where please look it up yourself because it'll change in your area. This is a general iatrogenic death chart in the entire US, but you can look it up just by your city or just by your state as well. So iatrogenic just basically means shouldn't have happened. It didn't need to happen. It was accidental. So iatrogenic deaths caused by adverse drug reactions, 420,000 souls are lost annually to adverse drug reactions, costing the United States healthcare system $12 billion per year. Now, I get it. Who cares about the money? Even one life lost that shouldn't have been lost is one too many. And this is puzzling how the number is this big and we're still operating by this medical mindset. Lives lost from medical error, 98,000 per year, and a $2 billion cost to the healthcare system. Bed sores, 115,000 people per year die of bed sores. 88,000 people per year die of infection. Malnutrition, 108,800. Outpatients, just outpatient surgeries or outpatient procedures, 199,000 people per year die from outpatient procedures. Unnecessary procedures, this is 37,136 people. And this includes, elective procedures, and it includes procedures that ended up not being necessary. So let's say that someone has a gallbladder removed, and then after removal, turns out gallbladder wasn't the issue. Surgery related in general is 32,000 people per year. So the total of iatrogenic deaths in the United States per year is around 1,097,936. And the healthcare cost is $282 billion. Again, it's the lives lost that matter. But the financial reproach of that just goes to show us that what we're doing simply isn't working. And this would be a tremendous amount of savings. Not only could we save lives, but the healthcare expenses would be much improved if we would focus on vitalism and only use crisis care for that, which is crisis. Painkillers. So right now, opioid addictions is one of the most problematic things that we're facing as a nation. Many people get on pain medications for pain, for pain conditions that you can treat in your office, that your doctor has excellent success with. So back pain and headaches, this is drug-free, surgery-free options for these conditions that if a patient doesn't get drug-free, surgery-free options for, their only other answer, their only other solution to get out of pain is going to be painkillers. And opioid addictions are so incredibly problematic. Most people go in having no idea the addiction potential is so high, or that you can get addicted in less than 2 weeks of being on this. I mean, 2 days for some people, depending on their genetic propensity. Some people can develop opioid addictions in simply 2 days. So what ends up happening is patients will go in thinking this is going to be a lifeline, finally get out of pain, finally get out of pain, and it ends up being a noose around their neck that creates, any addiction is going to create a lot of neurological problems, but it creates a whole host of relational and financial and all kinds of other problems on top of it. All for things that you treat in your office. So headaches and back pain are the two most common reasons that people initiate painkiller treatments. And again, it may or may not help the pain. Most of the time it doesn't, because your body will reach this threshold where it needs a stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger dose until there is no stronger dose. But the most problematic thing is that the problem, the root cause, is never being addressed. Painkillers can mask a problem and allow it to get worse. I remember one time in one of the practices that I was in Georgia several years ago. So we had a lot of blue collar workers. A lot of them worked in the carpet factory, and they would go into work each day and they would lift these heavy, carpet rolls. And by the end of the day, of course, there's damage to their back and they're in all kinds of pain. Well, they would be popping ibuprofen like all day long for weeks, like it was Tic Tacs, just so that they could go back to work and do the same thing again. Of course, now they can't feel it, so they're making the problem worse because, my back feels better, so I can lift again today. When really, they have disc damage and degenerative joint disease and all kinds of problematic scar tissue around their spine, and things are getting worse and worse. But now they can't even feel the pain as much, so they're making the problem worse by overdoing it. So pain is a signal to us. It's a symptom. It's a signal of it's time to slow down, and it's time to focus on that area and find out what the problem is. It's not something that is just supposed to be masked. So let's go over a couple charts that it's really critical to have in your office. The first one is an organ chart. So you want to have some type of chart in your treatment area that your patients can look at and be able to trace themselves. Oh, okay, this nerve that comes out of this part of the spine, if I trace it, it goes to the heart, or it goes to the stomach, or it goes to the ovaries. We want them to be able to do that, and we want you to be able to do that so that you can really start to figure out how to connect these dots and how this all works together, and how your brain and your spinal cord really do control your health. So one good place to get this organ chart is going to be the Parker International. Their phone number is 1-800-950-8044. You can also check online at parkershareproducts.com. The next chart that you can get is one that does not show the organs, but just shows the nerve distribution. So you want to have both of those charts. Your doctors, in the area that they're doing their first report, they're already going to have these charts, but many of you will also have them in every treatment room, and you may have them in your your resting areas or your therapy bays. You can also get these in tear-off carbon copies, so that they can take one home. And again, these are just great educational charts to have around the office. It's excellent for talking points for you as well. If a patient begins to communicate a symptom to you or a condition to you, you can walk them over to the chart and kind of do a little education for them and help them see where those nerves go and how that all makes sense. So this second chart basically just has the brain, spinal cord, and then it has the nerves as they branch out, but there's no organ attachments. So you can see how intricate this pathway is. So the place that you can get these posters is Parker International. Again, 1-800-950-8044 or parkershareproducts.com. Patient Media also has these. Then the third chart is you want to have a subluxation degeneration chart. The reason this is so important is because it's critical that our patients understand that spinal problems are degenerative in nature. And what that word means, it's really just fancy for it will get worse or better depending on what you do for intervention. So just like any degenerative disease, diabetes, heart disease, cancer to some extent, spinal problems, degenerative joint disease, and degenerative disc disease will get worse. It will progress worse if something isn't done to stop it. So it's very important also for our patients to understand that you can begin to reverse it. You may not always be able to get back to normal, to where you were when you were 16, 17, but you can stop it from progressing into the next phase. And that right there is a very important treatment objective is, hey, let's stop the bleeding here. Let's stop it from getting worse. Then second to that, once we've stopped it from progressing degeneratively worse, then we can begin the process of correction and reversing that process to whatever extent their body will allow. So again, a subluxation degeneration chart is a really helpful tool to have. You want to have them in your room that your doctor does first report, and then any other place in the office that's appropriate to do so. You can get these right or left facing so that the doctor can match these to the way that they're going to place their x-rays. This is a great patient education tool and also an excellent one for you to have. So Parker International again is 1-800-950-8044 or parkershareproducts.com. You can also get these from Patient Media. It's the exact same thing, just maybe a different color scheme. And the nice part about those as well is they also have the carbon copy tear-offs, so you can get a poster for the wall and a carbon copy tear-off that the patient can bring home with them. So I hope you have enjoyed chiropractic philosophy, and I am super excited to see you at the next boot camp. God bless.